Hi, and welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm Ange McCabe, CEO and co-founder of Intuitive Performance. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, whole person leadership facilitator, and your host. The Human Side of Business podcast is fueled by the genuine curiosity to understand how personal characteristics and skills can be leveraged to drive individual and team performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately organizational success within business. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, expanding our learning edges, and exploring the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of organizations. I'm so glad you're here. Hi there, this is Ange McCabe, CEO and co-founder of Intuitive Performance, where our business is the success of your business. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, facilitator, and your co-host along with Scott Rust of the Elevate Business Podcast. The Elevate Business Podcast is a journey of discovery fueled by curiosity to genuinely understand what makes people tick when it comes to their professional path, choices made, and the personal characteristics that drive performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately success. The Elevate Business Podcast is here to promote the enormous contribution of small and medium-sized businesses around the world by exploring the actions that make a workplace successful, the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of an organization, and how we build whole person leaders from the ground up. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, growing our learning edges, and honoring our passions with a special guest who has elevated their businesses, overcome obstacles, and inspires others to do the same. So glad you're here. Hi, and a warm welcome to episode number 33 of the Elevate Business Podcast. Both myself, Ange McCabe, and Scott Russ are your hosts. We have the pleasure of introducing you to Benjamin Alarie, who has spent the better part of his career contributing to the business law community. As a graduate from Yale Law School, he has been the Associate Dean and still is a professor of law at the University of Toronto, a faculty member of the Vector Institute of Artificial Intelligence, and a TEDx Speaker. Bringing together his years of experience as co-founder and CEO at Blue Jay, Benjamin leads his team in developing legal technology powered by AI to provide greater clarity to law everywhere and on demand. Welcome, Benjamin.
Thanks, Ange. It's my pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Likewise. So tell us a little bit about yourself and your company and a bit of your journey in getting there.
Sure. So I really am a tax nerd at heart. I studied philosophy, economics, finance as an undergrad. I went to law school at the University of Toronto, did a graduate degree in economics with my law degree, fell in love with tax of all things, tax policy, tax law, really got animated by that. I did graduate work at Yale, studied again, focused on taxation. I did a stint as a law clerk at the Supreme Court for my articles. And then I was hired as a tenure track law professor at the University of Toronto, coming right out of that clerkship year. And I was 26 at the time. I think one of the youngest tenure track law professors, maybe at the University of Toronto in its modern history at the law school. And I was studying tax and researching tax, writing articles on tax, spending a lot of time on tax. And tax is a word you're going to hear a lot, maybe in the podcast today. Put my head down and did a lot of writing, got tenure when I was 31. At 33, I became associate dean of the law school. And I set about making some changes in how we ran things at the law school. First to the admission system, making the admission system much more data intensive. We have, after all, decades of results of students who were applying to the law school, how well they performed at law school, and we just hadn't connected those data sets before in a rigorous way to figure out, okay, are we putting the right weight on the right things in assessing candidates to study law at the University of Toronto? So we did that. We changed the grading system around and adopted a modified honors pass fail grading system. And then really crucially for where I find myself with Blue Jay now, we started, I led an effort to reform the first year curriculum in the JD program. So the way that we deliver the law school curriculum. And I remember this exercise required us to think through what are the essential skills that we need to be arming law students with to prepare them for work after law school, whether that's in government, in policy, in private practice, in business, in NGOs, depending on what they want to do. what does the law school what should the law school curriculum look like? And I remember sitting in my office as associate dean and basically being struck by lightning because I realized that the legal profession is going to change dramatically over the coming decades because of, well, one thing, computing power. Everyone, I think, is familiar with this idea of Moore's law, doubling computing power every 2 years. And people are familiar with this idea that so much of our information is moving online. It's digitized. That's certainly true of legal information. So court cases, legislation, regulations, all sorts of stuff is moving online. So we've got digital data, we've got computing power, and the third ingredient are algorithms, right? So at the University of Toronto, it's one of the top places in the world for AI research. My colleagues in the computer science department, most notably Jeffrey Hinton, who's the guy who kind of invented deep learning, are working on these algorithms. And I was sitting in my office at the law school. I was like, holy smokes, things are really going to change in law in the coming decades. And it's very clear, like it seems absolutely inevitable that it's going to happen. And then I thought further, okay, how does this influence the curriculum? But then even more so, like, what should I be doing about it? Because it became very clear I could cling to my chalk at the law school for the next 20 years, 30 years. I think my my normal retiring date from the law school is sometime in 2038, I believe, based on my years of service. And so I'm like, okay, so many years from now, sometime in 2038, I'll be, faced with my normal retirement date. Do I think the law is going to be the same in 2038 as it is now? Absolutely not. Like, it's not going to be the same. And so what should we do about it? So I talked to a couple of my colleagues at the law school, brilliant guys. Albert Yoon, who grew up in upstate New York and then went to Yale College as an undergraduate, then went to Stanford, did his law degree at Stanford, his PhD at Stanford. And as a scholar, his research is about analyzing judicial behavior using big data. And so Albert brings statistical tools to the study of law. And Anthony Niblett, who grew up in Melbourne, Australia, studied business and law, and then went to Harvard and did his PhD at Harvard in economics. And he taught at the University of Chicago before joining the University of Toronto. Both Anthony Niblett and Albert Yoon, brilliant guys, really fantastic scholars and researchers with the kind of interest in empirical ways of thinking about the law that tie into machine learning, tie into artificial intelligence, and we're potentially interested in this. And so I made the pitch to them. I said, guys, things are not going to be the same. We have an amazing opportunity to go on a bit of a journey here and invent ways of approaching the law that are going to be transformative. They're going to change how the legal profession operates, how legal education is delivered, how the courts operate, how governments govern, and fundamentally eventually get to the operating system of society, because that's what law fundamentally is. And so with that impassioned plea to them, I said, guys, and I'm going to be on sabbatical next year. So this is sometime in 2014. Like, I'm going to be on sabbatical next year. I want to throw myself into this and see if we can get some compelling research results that would be the basis for doing something more serious. And I said, like, if you think about the people who might be able to pursue this, they're of two types. One, folks who are really, really expert in the law. The problem is the people who are really, really expert in the law are predominantly in law firms, and they have clients and they have busy, successful professional lives, and they're not going to go and start a business on this front. They have the legal expertise. They're missing another ingredient, though, and they already have a very good profession that they're following. They have great careers. The other kind of person, the other ingredient that might be essential is someone with the mathematics, statistical, technical ability to do this. So think about those students of Jeffrey Hinton, right, in the computer science department, who are learning all of these computational statistics and machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques. They could also maybe potentially do something in this area. The challenge is they don't know the law well enough to really do it. And honestly, I find tax law totally fascinating. Not everyone does. A lot of those computer science grads who are specializing in data science, will be more normal people who don't really care so intently about tax law. And so I said, but guys, so listen to me. I think we have the legal sophistication, the legal depth. I mean, we're law professors, and because of our quantitative backgrounds, with our graduate studies and our research agendas, we're actually perfectly placed to be the kinds of folks who do this. And then the natural question is, okay, but Ben, among all of the people who have these two backgrounds, the legal sophistication and the quantitative sophistication, why do you think we should be the ones to start this? I said, well, for one thing, I don't know. Most law professors are not really the kinds of people that you think might be successful entrepreneurs and risk takers and going to go out and make something happen. I know I'm generalizing, but I think they're kind of polar opposite kind of people, right? Generally, like if you just even interrogate your own impression about, what kind of person is the kind of person who becomes a law professor, you probably think really, really conservative, really, really smart, really, really scholarly, probably kind of nerdy, probably not the kind of person who would say, oh, I know, I'm going to go start up a tech company. And you'd be right 99% of the time. So, and then, among law professors, how many law professors really have that empirical bent and want to look at data and statistics? And that's an even like a smaller number. So my pitch concluded to Albert and Anthony, guys, we got to do this. I think it's going to be really fun to do this, assuming we can get some good technical results. I think it's going to have really big impacts in the profession, and I can't imagine something more interesting to spend a big chunk of my time doing, at least for the next little while, and we'll see where it goes from here. But I think it's extraordinarily promising, and so that was over 6 years ago. Now that we started in on this, and so Blue Jay was the result. So this was a pretty long-winded answer to your question. What tell us about yourself, but I think that's the right kind of lead in to the rest of the conversation.
And we appreciate that too, Benjamin, because it really shows that for you, it wasn't the leadership role that you were looking forward to. It was the actual problem solving piece of it and combining AI learning with tax law. So, surmising, I guess, quickly, the problem is in 10 plus years, law is going to be substantially different. So either I can retire with it or maybe before it or grow with it. And you've chosen the latter. So thank you for that. It was fantastic.
Thanks. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That was the idea. It was like, I just looked. It was mental time traveling, right? I think this is a very useful technique. It's like, let's imagine future me. If future me looks back at current me 10 years from now, 15 years from now, what will be the acute regret that future me has about current me? And I think it would have been, had I taken a pass and just be like, I really, being a professor is really safe. It's really something like starting a tech company sounds scary. I don't think I'm going to do it. I could easily imagine 15 years from now really regretting having made that decision. And so it was really just minimizing that future regret. And if we tried and it didn't succeed, then at least we tried. And that's not a regretful thing. It's like, oh, well, we tried something and it didn't pan out. But that's a way better future self regret. And it's be very modest, right? It's like, well, that was interesting.
And I think there's a lot to unpack there, Ben. And I think it goes, should be acknowledged the fact that, you mentioned that in modern day age, the first tenured professor at the University of Toronto, working as a law clerk as part of the Supreme Court of Justice, and different things along those lines. I'm really curious, how did the role of performance kind of play in your evolution in your career that kind of has led you now to lead Blue Jay?
So it's interesting how this conversation is going. Reminds me of something I read by Scott Adams, who's the author of the Dilbert cartoons. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Scott Adams, but it's very interesting. He wrote something that really resonates on this front, which is, if you if you want to be successful, you kind of have two big choices to make. One is to try to become the very, very best at a single thing, the best person in the world. And so focus on that one thing. So, become the very best at chess, like Magnus Carlsen, or become the very best at your sport and become an Olympic gold medalist in that sport. Like that's the really, really hard process as becoming, if you're defining success as becoming the single most successful person in one sport and to win the Olympic gold medal, it's going to be very hard. Instead, Scott Adams says, the much safer path to success is to become very good at 2 or 3 or 4 different things. And not top 1% in 3 or 4 different things, but you just have to become like top 10% or top 25%, just better than most people at a few different things. And then that's a much more realistic goal for a lot of people. And then you mix and match those different capacities that you have and suddenly become very, very valuable in the market, because what you're doing is relatively rare. The intersections of those different circles on your Venn diagram of what you're good at is going to be by definition relatively rare. So if you're, top 10% in 2 things, suddenly that's 1% of people who are going to have that intersection. Then you add in a third thing that you're top 10% at, suddenly it's 1 in 1,000. And then suddenly, okay, that's really, really compelling. And you'll be able to be recognized for that. And the market will reward you for those rare and valuable skills that you're bringing to bear. And so when I think about that question, performance, that's what's popping into my mind, because I think, oh, well, actually, that's kind of similar to the founding of Blue Jay. We've got the law, and I like to think our legal team is really strong. Probably, the top 2% of lawyers represented on our legal team, and then incredibly good on the data science front, on the AI front. Probably also top 5%, top 10%, really strong. And then having entrepreneurial leadership skills, probably again top quarter or something. And suddenly you bring these ingredients together, and it's really quite a compelling combination. And that's been propelling us. And so I think the hard path is just trying to be flat out the best at one super competitive thing. The easier path is combining things that you have an advantage in together and finding that area where you can really make a novel and powerful and valuable contribution.
That's an interesting thought process around performance, because oftentimes we hear different perspectives with regards to relating to experiences or relating to almost from a black and white perspective around performance, whether it's team, personal, individual. But what I'm hearing here is that you're talking about tasks and skills, in that the skill sets around performance doesn't have to be singular, but rather being a little bit more inventive or creative, or I guess pointed, maybe is a better word, to identify multiple areas that you can be good at, and not the 1%, but top 25 for you. So in figuring out that for yourself, and not just that, but just in general, in stepping in that CEO position, what's been your biggest learning for yourself?
Oh, wow. I've learned, here's a huge learning, actually, and it's becoming manifest to me just through this conversation, which is that so much of the things that you can learn, and this is probably not news to lots of people. This was kind of news to me, though. A lot of the learning that you can do is not going to come out of books. So I'm an inveterate reader. I read on average over the last several years about 100 books a year. And so for me, it's been like a very, very dominant way for me to learn about the world and to collect information and to refine my understanding of how the world works. As CEO, one of the most amazing things to me is opening up whole new different ways of learning things, because in this role, there is so much that I need to learn to figure out in order to advance the business that you can't learn about in the right way from books, because the people who are really good at the skills that I need to learn don't write books about the things that I need to learn about. Like there's virtually no overlap. And even if you read some of the stuff in those kinds of books doesn't help you do the things. It's like reading about, I don't know, horse riding, equestrian or something. It's like, okay, I can read a book about riding a horse, but it doesn't actually make me better at riding a horse at a high level. And so you just actually have to get on the horse and do it, right? And so and then there are other techniques. There are hacky ways to get into that, which is to become friends with others who are riding horses for a living and ask them about their tricks. And so I found developing relationships with other CEOs of startup companies has been very helpful, especially those that are a little bit further along where they've already learned a bunch of tough lessons, and we can have totally frank conversations about lessons learned and experiences. And that's been extremely, extremely helpful to me. But so the answer, just to repeat it, is that not all the answers are in books, which is like probably totally obvious to everyone except me.
And it seems like you were able to, I guess, jump on the horse by actually starting Blue Jay and using maybe some of that experience from the learnings that you had in the books, and now going out there and saying, hey, you know what, these things are not maybe the same as what I've read, and actually experiencing them has been a great way for you to actually learn and continue to grow.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And early on, it was interesting. One of my very first things that I did when I started Blue Jay was I called former students and said, "Oh, like I noticed that you're involved in venture capital. Can you help me out? Like, what book should I read?" This was actually my initial question: like, what book should I read? And they had great suggestions. So I talked to a number of former students, and they got me started. I learned enough to get started, but then I also realized very quickly that, like, I'm not going to have all the answers. I can't know at the beginning how things are going to play out. All I need to have conviction about, though, is what are the right things for me to be working on right now, today? What can I do today to get closer to where I think we need to go? And because I think that the biggest risk is that you structurally misallocate your time. If you're not working on the right problems out of the gate, that's just gonna take you off the critical path to success, and it's very difficult. You have to stay on that critical path, and you can't map out that critical path in advance. It all depends on the circumstances. So you have to remain agile and open and situationally aware, and that's where tapping into more experienced folks and asking them, like, okay, what do you think I should be focusing on? And early on at Blue Jay, we went through the Creative Destruction Lab at the University of Toronto at the business school. That was extremely helpful. So the way that works is, you join an incoming cohort of companies, and the Creative Destruction Lab has a number of senior mentors who are former entrepreneurs and now are angel investors and want to help early stage companies focus on the right things through the program. And that first year is kind of training wheels for a startup, going through that first year of the Creative Destruction Lab and knowing that the Creative Destruction Lab would keep supporting Blue Jay so long as each meeting, and they're 6 weeks apart, I believe, every 6 weeks we were hitting those three most important deliverables to stay on the critical path towards success. And it's just very hard to know what those things should be unless you've been through it before. And so it's another example of not all the answers being in books. Going and having those mentors being able to help us, and really fantastic people, like Mike Serbinas was one of those folks who was really helpful. David Ossip, who's at Ceridian, was very, very helpful. Dan DeBow, a serial entrepreneur in Toronto, very, very helpful. Ajay Agrawal, who is the director of the Creative Destruction Lab and the founder of it, very, very helpful. And having really phenomenal people like that taking an interest in what we're doing and suggesting what we should be focused on, totally indispensable.
Okay. And so I guess talking a little bit more about Blue Jay, and you've identified that as you guys had the training wheels on, it was really about identifying, okay, what are those critical things we need to be focused on to move forward. So what about today? 5 or 6 years down the road, what are those critical things you're focused on now, or those challenges that are coming up for you guys?
Yeah, it's exciting. Things become a lot clearer as as you move along, and so we've grown to we're close to 60 employees now here in Toronto. I mean, after starting with 3 law professors, we're at 60 full-time employees. We're about to close another round of financing, so that's very exciting. We did a pre-seed round of funding. We did a seed round of funding. We did a Series A round of funding. Now we're in the process of closing a Series B round of funding, which is all validation for the path that we've taken and the market that we've developed and the software that we've developed. So now we've got our Canadian tax software in use by all the big four accounting firms right across Canada, by the majority of the big law firms, by the federal government, the Department of Justice, the Canada Revenue Agency. So the Canadian tax product has found its legs and found its market, and it's making a really valuable contribution in giving taxpayers and the government confidence about the conclusions that they're drawing from their analyses of different tax positions. So that's great to see. Our Canadian employment law product is also widespread use right across Canada. So it's in use in big corporations. The majority of the big law firms, labor and employment law boutiques, are using it to answer questions around things like, how much reasonable notice do I need to give to this employee who I unfortunately, have to terminate? And you can use this to get insight into what all the case law, thousands of cases, would mean for your particular client on these particular facts in your client's situation. Very, very helpful. Now, our main focus in terms of developing a market is breaking into the U.S. tax market. So this is really exciting. We raised our Series A with the promise to our investors that we would use the proceeds to build a U.S. tax product, and that's what we've done. We're now in the position where the U.S. tax product is as mature as the Canadian tax product, which already has a ton of traction in the market, and we want to launch that into the U.S. market. And we've got some really early developments there. 3 of the big 4 accounting firms are in paid pilots of the platform now, and we're having encouraging conversations with the biggest law firms in the U.S. and it's pretty exciting. But the U.S. market is probably 12 to 15 times bigger than the Canadian market, and so it's a massive opportunity for Blue Jay. So we're on the cusp of something I feel very exciting.
And we can hear it in your voice and the way that you're expressing yourself, and that's fantastic. When it comes to growing your team over the past 5 to 6 years, what can you tell our viewership around some of the pain points that you've experienced through that, either then or now?
Yeah, hiring takes a lot of time. I think that's something that anyone who's been on this journey before might not appreciate fully. When you're growing very quickly, so when you're going from 20 people to 50 people, you've got 20 people who are each gonna just run the numbers, right? Those 20 people have to hire 1.5 people each to get from 20 people to 50 people. And of course, it's not like everybody is equally involved in the hiring. It's concentrated among probably a handful of people if you're at 20 employees. So that handful of people, those 5 people, have to hire the next 30 people. So it's like, okay, you have to hire 6 people. Well, how many people do you think you have to interview to hire 6 really phenomenal people? Well, probably 10 times as many people than you're actually going to hire, right? So, okay, so now suddenly you're talking about, okay, you're in this 20-person company, 5 people are going to be doing most of the hiring. You want to hire 30 people by the end of the year. For each one of those, you need to do 10 interviews. This is a massive amount of work. This is like 300 interviews cumulatively across those people, and probably multiple touch points for every candidate who you actually bring on board. It's not just one interview and you're done. It's one interview with the initial manager, and then you bring in the other 4 people. So it takes a ton of time and effort to hire those people. And you can't just hire a recruiter as an early stage company. Recruiters are bloody expensive. So you want to be really careful when you bring in a recruiter, and they're not going to be familiar with your exact culture. And so it's not a complete answer. You still just have to do the work of interviewing and finding those people who are going to be a culture fit for your company and kind of get it and have the skills and want to believe in the mission. So it's a lot of selling to those candidates too, especially at the early stage, because you're looking for people who are really making a bet on your company at that stage too, because the people that you want have all kinds of other options as well about the kind of work that they're going to do and where they're going to go. So yes, you're screening them, but they're screening you. And so it's a bilateral interview process. You have to sell yourself and the vision for the company and get them excited about it as well. So I think it just takes a ton of time to do really good early stage hiring, and the stakes are really high, because if you misfire on a hire, especially when your company is really small, that can really have a big impact on morale and happiness of everybody at the company. And ultimately, it can be existential for the company. If you're a big company, if you have 5,000 people, one bad hire, it's not going to be existential for your company. But if you're 20 people and you make a disastrous hire, that could very well be existential for your company. So it's scary. I'm glad we're no longer at 20 people. Even as I talk about it, I'm glad we're at closer to 60.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned the importance, Ben, of like selling the company. It's a bilateral interview. How is it that how do you keep your employees aligned with the company and the vision and kind of get them on board of the mission that you're looking to create?
I think a lot of it is we have clarity of thought about what we stand for, what our values are. We've clearly articulated our values, what we stand for as a company. We can describe our long-term vision, what our mission is as a company. That stuff really helps. And this is, I promise, is not like an infomercial, and not all of the answers are in books, but this is actually a really fantastic book, Traction by Gino Wickman. It provides, and the system isn't magical, but it provides a very clear meeting cadence, communication cadence, goal setting cadence for the company, recruitment cadence, how to think about the big parts of what you're trying to do as an organization. And it's a reliable method. I learned about it from talking to other CEOs about what they do and what they've found successful in their businesses. And a lot of them have used either Traction. Some of them rely on OKRs for organizing the company and getting alignment. We found Traction to be really phenomenal at making clear, and we know people are clear on this because we survey everyone at BlueJay every quarter, and we get anonymous feedback on how people feel about a bunch of different dimensions of their work lives, and anything that comes up as a problem, we are proactive and we want to address it. And so, but one of the questions we ask is, do you understand how your work connects into BlueJay's goals as a company? And a high percentage, 90 something, high 90s% of BlueJay respondents say they either strongly agree or they agree with that statement, that they really understand how what they're doing connects into BlueJay's goals as a company. And that's really important in getting that alignment. And it all comes from being very deliberate about how everyone's role kind of builds up into the company's goals. So for this year, for example, we have just two goals as a company. One is revenue growth, so kind of top line revenue growth. And then the other is usage growth. So growth of monthly active users on the platform. And we have ambitious goals on both of those dimensions, but it's very simple to articulate. This is what we're trying to do. More sales, more usage. And they're mutually interdependent, because as people become stronger users of the platform, they're really getting the value out of the platform, then they're going to subscribe more, and it's going to attract more subscribers. There'll be word of mouth. And then every individual person at BlueJay has their own personal goals for each quarter that ladder up into those company goals. And so that alignment is totally natural. Once you do the hard work of thinking it all through and planning it, then it just becomes very clear what people should be doing. And they're not rowing against each other. People are not kind of working at cross purposes. Everyone's kind of aligned and rowing in the same direction. And that means people feel really great about the work that they're doing and how it connects. And even when things are hard, because a startup is a roller coaster. Some days are amazing. Some days are really quite, I find myself sometimes feeling, a little bit frustrated. That's totally normal. It's par for the course. And it's totally how these things go. So even on those days when things aren't kind of breaking the way that we hope to, having that clarity about what we're trying to do is really important, because you dust yourself off, you hop back into the saddle, and I'm back with the horse analogy, and you go off riding. Even if you get thrown, you just keep going.
Hearing you, Ben, in the sense that there's a couple of pillars that kind of stand out for you. So from a strategic perspective, ensuring that you have the right structures in place for your team members. And then from an internal perspective, it's looking like communicating often your culture, your vision, your mission. And then from a performance perspective, it's ensuring that your team members really understand what are your company goals, your departmental goals, and the individual goals, and how they're impacting. So the communication goes up and down within your organization.
Absolutely. And one of the values, so we have 6 values. One of the values is team interest over self-interest. So that means no Blue Jay person is in this alone. You're supported by the rest of the company. So you've got, yes, we've all got our personal goals that we're working to for every quarter. But also there's a pervasive sense that if somebody needs my help, if they're encountering some block or obstacle that's stopping them from getting to their goal, they're absolutely encouraged to be proactive about reaching out for help from others at Blue Jay who can help them get to their goal. And that's a huge part of the culture. We mutually support each other, and it's, if somebody needs help, we pitch in and help. Absolutely. So I think that's a really important ingredient. I think the other values that we have are really important too, but I think that one really, is a standout amongst the values.
That resonates with us for sure, Ben. And the last question that we have for you today, what are 3 words of inspiration that you would want the world to hear?
Oh, this is really hard. I saw this question. You guys shared it in advance, and I mulled it over, and I couldn't really come up with just 3 words. So I'm going to punt on that one, unless you want to give me just like 10 seconds, and I'll come up with a few words. So
please do. Yes.
We tend to use 3. We're pretty flexible.
Yeah.
The 3-word marker.
Okay, I've got it. And so so what's coming to mind is when I graduated from law school, the gift that I got from my parents was a really nice watch. And I still have it, but it sits in my closet because now I wear an Apple Watch. But I had this really nice watch that was gifted to me by my parents. And when I got it, the invitation was to get it engraved with 3 different words. So this is perfect. So this is my source of now, and I'm only just thinking of this now. But the 3 words that I selected to get engraved on the back of the watch were these 3: envision, strive, and become. And so it's all about envisioning where you want to go, working like crazy, striving to achieve that. And then it's actually about not having achieved the thing, but it's the person that you've become in the process of doing the work necessary to achieve the goal. That's the real reward. It's not the accomplishment, which is going to be on a piece of paper, or it's going to be something that's kind of hollow. It's actually, it's ontological. It's something that you become and something that you grow into. And that's the true reward of the journey. So I would say envision, strive, become.
And really enjoy that there's a personal story behind that too, Ben. Thank you for sharing that with us. And we really appreciate you joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
We also really appreciate you sharing your entrepreneurial insights with Intuitive Performance and our subscribers. So for those of you who would like to learn more about your business, we're going to provide a link to Ben's company profile on the Elevate Business podcast title page. Take good care. Thanks for listening to the Elevate Business podcast. I hope you enjoyed the program. You can subscribe to future podcasts at intuitiveperformance.com, where you can also sign up for webinars and learn more about professional coaching and our facilitation solutions available to help fire up your whole person performance skills and drive actions for success. Until next time, stay true to you and take care of each other. We are all better together. Thanks for listening to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm glad you could join us. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated with our latest content, make sure to visit our website. The link can be found in the episode description, where you can subscribe to the podcast, sign up for our newsletter, and learn more about our whole person leadership services. Sounds interesting? Explore the Whole Person Leadership Cohort by Intuitive Performance, a unique program that offers unparalleled support to managers on every step of their leadership journey. Our program features evidence-based assessments, workbooks, group coaching, and interactive learning experiences to help you level up your leadership skills. Reach out today to apply to one of our upcoming cohorts. Until next time, take care and stay curious.